evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Before we start, if you're new to the channel, please hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. We're constantly adding cross streams with other channels and adding new shows. Tomorrow, we're doing another episode of our all new look episode of the leftist tabletop gaming show, Gaming Materialists, featuring our very own mean Jean Bajlan and the Talcum X of the left, Derek Varn. Also, I recorded the first episode of Pop Life. It's my new show where I talk about more pop culture stuff. For the first episode, I sat down with singer of influential hardcore and metalcore band 18 Vision singer James Hart. We had some slight audio issues, but it was still a cool talk. And there's going to be much more, and I'll be joined on future episodes with my good friend and fellow musician, Pasquale Romero. It's not that he and Pascal have similar names, it's the last name. Also, got to plug these appearances. The show is up. I recently did with JG Michael of Parallax Views. We discussed my recent article in Sublation Magazine on Woodstock 99. If you haven't done it, check it. Wherever you're watching the show, wherever you're listening to the show, there are definitely links in the description to my writing, Pascal's writing, and also Kuba and Jean's writing that we did in Sublation. There's not a link to everything those guys did because they have been published in several places, but definitely have Pascal's links up to his writings in Newsweek. Also, I will be a guest on the Young Turks tomorrow to discuss Crime and the Unhoused. It's going to air at about 3:30 p.m. Pacific time. That's 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. If I get more information on that, I'll definitely post it. And it's going to be an interesting show because I've just been informed that all of the Wi-Fi in this entire state has been shut off.
You'd be surprised how many people love the crack.
Additionally, if you like what we do here and you want to see it continue and you have the means to further support the channel, for our patrons, we have the exclusive Champagne Room. Our post-show after-hours hang where we have more ridiculous, uncensored fun, usually watching some weird movies that would get the main show demonetized. Depending on your level of patronage, you can get exclusive TIR merch. At any level, you get to join us for movie nights. We are going to be having more fun movie nights, but we do have to get a serious one in, as we did have a silly one last time. We're going to get a serious one in. I have a movie idea. My co-host has been very silent on his movie idea suggestions, so I have an idea. A movie that is fun, yet a great discussion topic, I think. I believe it was a 2014 movie that David Cross directed called Hits. I would love to watch that with you guys and get your guys' feedback. I'd love to get Pascal's feedback. Also, it looks like most of our videos are still not being allowed to have ads or limited ads due to content. So if you guys have the means and feel so inclined, if you like what you're hearing and seeing, drop a bucket or two in the tip jar. It goes a very long way to keep the show going. Also, how can I forget? Tickets are available for our live show in LA. It'll be a joint venture with Give Them an Argument and Left Reckoning. That link should be going up constantly in the chat. It's definitely a link in the description. October 23rd. I can't wait to see y'all's face into place. That being said, one face that I look forward to seeing is the adorable face that adorns the new This is Revolution Central Committee t-shirt with the Cosby smile. We've sold a few of them. There's a few people walking around right now with Pascal's smiling face. Please welcome my homie, my dog. He's the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings in the chat. Peace and greetings in the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Interesting day, man. There's never any shortage of crazy.
I just want to say that I am very, very proud of my co-host, Jason Miles, the host of the show, for his branching out now into the Young Turks tomorrow. His ability to get rec for his audio only live stream kind of historical paths down memory lane with his educational content and his writing in Sublation as well. He's hitting all the spots. Makes me want to get out there more and do more of the same. He's definitely the uptier right now, man. Jason Miles is putting in massive content creation for this podcast.
I wasn't able to show Pascal, but I got an advanced copy of the trailer for the upcoming video essay, and I'm working actually with another filmmaker, which is rare for me to actually hand over a certain amount of control. But this young man had hit me up. We had a good rapport, and it's been a really good working relationship so far. We're totally on the same page. This is going to be the longest video essay that we've ever done, and probably breaking it into about 2 or 3 parts. We were having a big group central committee meeting earlier today about how we were going to premiere it. So we're going to be doing it before the live show. Hopefully, if it gets done, let's knock on wood. Part of that is me writing the end to this. I usually try to end stuff on a bit of a high note. You know, you have to end with hope. But all hope is lost in this in this new video essay. So I got the trailer with my voiceover in it, and it's very exciting. I sent it to some of our friends in academia and media. I sent it to Pascal. I sent it to you without the voiceovers, and you liked it. And you were like, "Whoa, this is good without the voiceover." So the voiceover just got added. So when we're done with the show, I'll forward you a copy, and you and the central committee a copy. I'm very, 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 very excited for when we get to drop this. But movie night, do you have any suggestions? Because I'm thinking we watch Hits. It's funny and it's topical.
I was thinking about watching, believe it or not, Eddie Murphy movie from 1984.
Best Defense?
No, not Best Defense. 84, 82.
Beverly Hills Cop?
Not Beverly Hills Cop. The one where he
48 Hours?
He's a homeless
Trading
guy.
Places.
Trading Places, yeah.
I'm down for that.
Interesting kind of comedic outlook on capitalism and its misadventures.
Someone said Repo Man. I don't think Eddie Murphy was in Repo Man. I'd be really shocked if he... No, he's not in Repo Man. But I'm... If you want to watch Trading Places on movie night, I'm in for that.
Yeah, man. That's going to be interesting. That'll be funny.
If we watch, okay, we got to keep, I have to stay true to the agreement that we made on air. So if we're going to watch Trading Places, which will be a more serious movie night movie, then we also have to watch a silly movie. And I've been falling down a post-show, post-work rabbit hole of ridiculous, silly movies. So if we can get the other secret, sometimes why member of the committee, Jeremy Salmon, to help us out, then we can do 2 movie nights. Two movie nights. So I'll be excited for that. So let's try to make that happen. We'll just talk off air, Pascal, about when we want to do movie night. Sound like a
We
plan?
do that.
Because we got a lot going on. Because one of the crew is getting married, and a lot of us are venturing to the Great White North to be part of the wedding. I don't know if we can say on air, so I'll be quiet about it, but we can't. I don't know. But we have an interesting show today because it's a show that kind of just fits right into Pascal's wheelhouse, and that is the law. And one of our more viewed shows that we did, what was it, almost 2 years ago? Our critical race theory show with Paul McComb. It was Paul McComb's first time on the show. So is critical race theory derived from the Marxist tradition? Is it a path to truly understanding the racialized nature of criminal justice, or is it more akin to Afro-pessimism? From our guest's recent article in Sublation, unlike the labor movement, the struggle for racial equality is, by its very nature, a struggle of a minority against the majority, and CRT does not identify a social force inherent to the system of white supremacy that drives that system toward progressive transformation. Given the hopeless situation that faces the victims of racist oppression, Crenshaw, as in Kimberly Crenshaw, defends the failed civil rights strategy as the only viable strategy for securing a modicum of always fleeting relief from racial justice. The writer Frank Wilderson III has given the anti-racist politics of hopelessness a name: Afro-pessimism. Wilderson goes so far as to argue that emancipatory politics as such depends on anti-black racism for its very coherence. Quote, "Blacks do not function as political subjects," he writes. "Instead, our flesh and energies are instrumentalized for post-colonial, immigrant, feminist, LGBTQ, transgender, and workers' agendas." Unquote. The politics of hopelessness lends the anti-racist struggle a noble appeal, fighting for a just cause while being aware of the certainty of failure is a romantic gesture. Bell, as in Derek Bell, the godfather of critical race theory, calls on Black Americans to, quote, "realize, as our slave forebears did, that the struggle for freedom is, at the bottom, a manifestation of our humanity, which survives and grows stronger through resistance to oppression, even if that oppression is never overcome," unquote. Our guest, Stephan Hammel, co-hosts The Measures Taken, a podcast about the history of Marxism. This is going to be a very informative dive today. He is also assistant professor of music at the University of California, Irvine. His work has appeared in 20th Century Music and the International Review of the Aesthetics and Sociology of Music. He is currently finishing a monograph entitled The Materialist Conception of Music History. Please welcome Stephan Hammel.
Hello.
Stephan, thank you for coming on to discuss this rather fraught subject matter.
So I do have to ask this question, Stephan, and it's a very serious question.
Yeah.
You will be the third UC Irvine professor on the show, and I think one might be in your department, who I'm probably going to see in a couple days, and that's Catherine Liu. Is she in your department?
No, not in my department. I actually teach in the music department. And Catherine's all the way across campus, but she's, since I've been here, she's been very, very sweet to me and is a brilliant mind in her own right. So yeah, no, she's on campus with me here.
And another guest of show that I actually go way back to high school with, and I don't know how often she's on campus at this point anymore. And I'm sure you guys aren't in the same department as Professor Sora Han.
Oh no, I don't happen to know that person.
Different departments. Big campus, different departments.
Yeah.
But so I'm actually kind of shocked that you even bring up Wilderson in your writing. Maybe you feel safe because you guys aren't in the same department, that you can, take these jabs at Afro-pessimism and not have the Afro-pessimistic Legion of Doom attack you in the parking lot.
No, actually, I mean, as long as he's not on the committee that decides about my appointment, I take academic freedom very seriously by attacking all of my colleagues.
I hope
Make
that
sure-
works out for you long
Yeah, I was
term.
gonna say, make sure you talk to Catherine about that. So big shout out to UC Irvine, I guess, for constantly supplying us with a steady stream of show guests. That being said, can you please give those that don't know what critical race theory truly is a brief introduction? It gets treated as such a Marxist boogeyman in mainstream media that I think a quick refresher on what it is could be very important.
Yeah, let me say something about that context first. I think that most Americans encounter critical race theory as you say, as a bogeyman. So it's really popular in right-wing media, as liberals have learned from the New York Times, that in right-wing political campaigns and in school board meetings, which have become contentious recently, the phrase critical race theory has come to mean, well, any number of scary things. But on the left, the reaction to this renewed popularization of what really is a more or less anachronistic and, more or less arcane part of jurisprudential theory comes as a reaction to that right-wing, saber rattling, I guess. And there becomes a question on the left about the compatibility of our own commitments, as perhaps as Marxists, in my case as a Marxist, and this theoretical tradition, which is coming under such clear attack. So that at least brings the question to the fore. Now, what is critical race theory is really hard to say, if only because we have to distinguish it between what critical race theory is sort of on the ground, a literature we can put some borders around. It certainly includes figures like Derek Bell and like Kimberly Crenshaw, that is, these people who came out of law schools. But it can include as many sociologists too. I cite Bonilla Silva's work, the book "Racism Without Racists," and then I also cite Wilderson as part of a larger critical race discourse. And one of the reasons why it's important to see the difference between a smaller circle and a bigger circle is because that's the way it becomes relevant in fields well outside of law schools, that is, of jurisprudence. So, for example, in my own discipline of music, we made headlines because one of our own decided that music theory, that is compositional technique and the way it's taught, was entirely suffused with white supremacy and on what he himself claimed was a critical racial frame that he brought to the critique of the discipline. So the way it leaps, as it were, from discourse to discourse is an important feature of that discourse. So that's the first thing to say, how it arrives on the scene. The second thing to say is, I think that its history comes about as a result of the obvious failures of the mainstream of let's say, the classical civil rights period, which won its most significant and lasting victories in the context of the law, Brown versus Board of Education. And because it was the legal terrain in which that movement found its most lasting successes, or at least some imagined those most lasting successes, it became a site of attack when those successes did not end up creating the equitable society that they'd promised. Not unlike the disappointment that comes out of the French Revolution, which fails to achieve the kind of equitable society that the Jacobins desired. And so there was a critique of liberalism along with all of its values that had been enshrined in that legal study. And that's where you get a new conception of the law.
What's fascinating to me as someone who studied critical race theory in law school, who was never really enamored or convinced by it, is that the class makeup of the adherents to the theory is almost particularly interesting, in that they're all coddled, elite, institutionalized Black academics at higher educational institutions that are promoting this pretty much post-structural, postmodern theory of analysis, divorced from materiality, largely at a time in which actually the rate and amount of Black representation in what we call here the Black political class is expanding, and the actual responsibility of Blacks for the dominion and control over the political well-being of their fellow cohorts is actually going up. And at the same time, neoliberalism, which is the economic reality that transpires when there's a bipartisan consensus of taking capitalism into a new version of basic cannibalism, becomes the order of the day. I find these theories, whether they be critical race theory, whether they be Afro-pessimism, whether they be the barrage of all of this other, Negro speak, to be nothing but the inability of Black elites to understand how race works within the context of political economy in American society, and how capitalism otherizes race because it requires Black people to be disproportionately relegated to reserve army surplus labor, which is a basic Marxist concept that they are unwilling to contend with. I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Maybe I'm being a little too hard.
No, in fact, I find very little to disagree with there. I will put a couple of wrinkles in it. The one wrinkle is, although I'm really sympathetic to the observation that, hey, it's just the Black elite that seems to be, and by the way, their solution to the problems that they enumerate and describe is almost always to hire them. To teach somewhere or something. So yeah, you're right about the class character, but the class character alone is not sufficient. While it's definitely necessary as a critique, it's not sufficient to convince the skeptical Marxist or the Marxist who might be really attracted to taking on board critical race theory, some version of it. I'm thinking of Marxists here like Ashley Borer, who's published on this recently. It's not enough to convince them based on the class origin of its proponents. If only because, Karl Marx was petty bourgeois and he was supported his entire life by the son of an industrialist. So while the point is well taken, it's not enough by itself. And the second thing I'll say is about the relationship between the intellectual line that I'm tracing from critical theory, Marxism, and then critical theory to critical race theory, and then another line which leads to, let's say, postmodernism deconstruction. So that's going to be really out of the phenomenological tradition, Husserl, followed by figures like Derrida, etc. I take it that the difference between those two is, while they come about at roughly the same time, and they're both, irremediably academic and definitely worth throwing overboard for Marxists, are different in the sense that deconstruction is going to be anti-essentialist to its very core, and critical race theory really is trying to find an essence to society. In fact, one that can viably take over that place that had been occupied by the critique of political economy as they received it from the Marxist tradition. But otherwise, everything you just said is perfectly correct.
Right, because one of the things that's necessary to the critical racist practice is the reification of race as ontological or real, that it's earth science, it's like physics, that it's something that cannot be overcome. And I mean, what's really fascinating to me is just like, do these people realize that in 1959, almost 60% of Black people were sharecroppers or domestic workers? Like, within the span of most of these Negroes' lifetime, so much has changed, yet they make it seem like so little has transpired.
Well, you talk about it in your piece that it's kind of a foregone conclusion that civil rights didn't go far enough, especially in the legal world. And you cite Kimberly Crenshaw, I don't want to say would you call her the founder? What would you say? How do you say that? I don't want to call her the founder. I feel like she's Colonel Sanders when I say that.
She's the originator of one of the most popular concepts on left discourse in general, and in the critical theory tradition in particular, which is the concept of intersectionality. And for that alone, she's achieved a huge amount of acclaim.
But I mean, that concept existed before her. She just put a name to it, right?
Yeah, although I say this in my piece, it's important to remember the jurisprudential, that is the law school origin of this stuff, because the question she's trying to ask is, how ought civil rights lawyers to take up a case in which an employee, say, is wrongfully discharged when they are, both a woman and Black, and it's clear that the prejudice that motivated the wrongful dismissal, say, this is an example, just cannot be, is both at once. It's intersectional in that way. And that's a puzzle for a lawyer in the context of, of court case, abstracted from the puzzle of trying to win a case like that in our particular system. It's a really banal observation. Obviously, you find intersections anywhere, and so it's only a puzzle if it's in that particular context. But by virtue of the fact that once you abstract it from that context, it's so powerful, right? It's such a blousy concept that it's able to wrap around anything. It becomes very popular, and so anyway, it in inverse proportion to its usefulness. Anyway, you wanted to ask a question about Kimberly Crenshaw.
Well, you derail that, Stephan. I'm just kidding.
Apologies.
No, don't. I think Pascal had a follow up. I mean, he's got a very serious look on his face. I need to move out.
No, I mean, I for me, I just find the whole subject matter fundamentally unserious. Where people can say things like, "Oh, nothing has changed." What do you mean nothing has changed? I mean, it's. So you actually think that the quality of life for Black people in America today is the same way as it was in 1842?
Well, I mean, since we're talking about Marx and we're talking about Kimberly Crenshaw and these theories coming out of the legal tradition, and then you actually make a really interesting point that I think I don't hear too often in this discussion, that these ideas kind of get stuck in the idea that the only real movement you got out of civil rights happens in the courts. So without the courts, you really can't go much further. And I found it, I don't want to say fascinating, but I did find it fascinating that I know that you read all of Black Marxism.
Oh my God, that is so hard to get through. That is, well, okay, that's almost another subject. Okay, that's a particular piece of Cold War era anti-communism that the section that I devote to that book is to try to demonstrate that his understanding of Marxism is peculiar and almost sentence for sentence incorrect or misleading. So. Sorry, it's overly harsh, I guess, but it is a piece of anti-communist propaganda, and I think that's for something else. I should be clear, by the way, about something, which is, I'm outside of my realm of expertise when it comes to critical race theory. My home turf is the history of Marxism. So if I'm coming at this from with something new in hand, it's going to be. It's going to be about the way in which this relates to Marxism, and my relative horror at seeing a lot of my Marxist peers, let's say, sort of take it up and then really worry about it. And so I wanted to sort of disabuse people of that worry.
Well, people are asking in the chat right now, what book are we talking about? We're talking about the book Black Marxism, which I picked up thinking it was going to be like a history of Black Marxists, and it was not. It's a very dense book that is written in some sort of code, maybe.
That's on purpose. The author is trying to make you feel dumb. I'm not kidding. This is a very common in academia, and I wish I didn't love so much to hate on the institution that gives me my employment and my livelihood, but it's filled with ideologists who are trying to poison your mind, and academics can achieve a great deal of security in your in their interlocutors being disarmed by proprietary jargon and any amount of. And so, speaking of proprietary jargon, what's the great phrase we get from the book Black Marxism? We get the phrase racial capitalism.
Oh,
now,
wait a minute, Stephan. I have to stop you right here.
Go on.
I know you said you've watched the show.
Yeah.
And I feel like every time people say that, they watch the show like in the last year, and they don't remember the early days of the show when people would come on, especially as my co-host calls them, alabaster leftists. And they use the term racial capitalism. Look at him right now. Look at him right now. He's about to Thanos the screen. There was a 20-minute conversation that led into like an off-air conversation with another SoCal professor, not at your school, for a little further north than you at UCLA, over the idea of the term racial capitalism, because it was said, and it was almost like something went off in Pascal's head and he lost his damn mind. Racial capitalism does feel like a hot phrase that really got brought back into the forefront probably in the mid 2000s for me.
Can I be transparently blunt here? Does
Yes,
anyone think
please.
that it's accidental that a book that is purportedly Marxist, that is innately anti-Marxist,
Mhm.
with a theory that capitalism affects Black people in a specific kind of way, or racial capitalism, which when capitalism is race is a mode of capitalism, comes out at the exact time when you have, for the first time in maybe 50 years, people talking about socialism and cross-racial alliances in American society? If there's any accident as to why this anti-racist Black Marxism comes out, anti-Marxist book comes out, particularly between 2016 and today, I mean, not to be conspiracy theories, but I mean, come on, man, it's transparent. This is all to get. All of this is about getting Black people to be navel gazing, and fart sniffing their problems, so they don't want to get into any kind of cross racial alliances with anyone that is, God forbid, a sock dam or from other kind of branch of Marxism that's beyond the pale, that doesn't want to cater to their particular nuance of, whatever they want to call themselves, ashe, ashe, pour out libations or anything else.
I don't think that's conspiracy theory at all. I'm a Chomsky guy when it comes to the media. By the way, that book is his most Marxist book, is The Manufacturing of Consent. And, it's perfectly intelligible that someone who is looking to advance, in the civil service, otherwise known as the higher education system, would just, by instinct, know where his bread is buttered, and without, independent political convictions of his own, might want to just adhere to what he takes to be the political positions of those who are, well, in position to control his salary. So there needn't be any mystery about this, and we don't need to resort to any kind of conspiracy theory to understand why propaganda comes out of academia all the time. In fact, probably most of what's produced in the humanities is propaganda, at least in Chomsky's terms. I think that instinct is right on. It's my own.
And a lot of these theories, CRT and intersectionality, is also happening. And I'd love to get Pascal's take on this. We're starting to see kind of a boom in the Black middle class, right? In the early 90s, Pascal.
Well, yes, there was a small boom in the Black middle class in the early 90s. And also, more dangerously, to your point, Jason, as a means to try to get the Black middle class away from rooting their problems in political economy. In other words, it's as long as we keep people their eyes on the ball on the race issue, instead of challenging the political utility of race and capitalism, then everything will be okay. And using these types of theories does just that, because what it does is it doesn't ask, well, listen, if neoliberalism is making sure that X percentage of Blacks are not seeing a rise in income, then maybe there's a way in which this economy is being managed that's disproportionately disadvantaging Black people. Maybe we should challenge that on its terms. Then that's not going to happen.
Well, Stefan, does it feel like, and I'll ask this question to you guys in the chat as well. Does it feel like this stuff is kind of a politics of a bourgeoisie that is distancing itself from the proletariat or lumpen probably what they view as a lumpen proletariat, because at the same time we have this growing middle class of color. Actually, it's not just Black people. You're getting a growing Latin middle class as well during this time. Does it feel like there is a disassociation, though, bigger than it probably was in the 60s, with this now disparaging quote unquote working class, because we're in the throes of deindustrialization, and the fight now is not those people's fight, our collective colored fight. The fight is this middle class fight for these middle class jobs.
Yeah, I mean, the class character is important, and as I said before, non-accidental. But I wonder if the trap that critical race theorists found themselves in, or at least the trap I think they fell in, with respect to the critique of political economy, is not just as easy as to say, well, they needed something else to talk about. They did, but it was a little more subtle than that. So I think that what happened earlier than them and happened outside of the context of any middle class, even the Black middle class in the United States. One of the things that happens to Marxism, I mean, really early on, I'm talking the 1890s, the end of the 1890s, is that people start to challenge its political economic presuppositions. And they try to replace the critique of value, that is, which ends up with a theory of capitalism that sees capitalist production of profit as constantly undermining itself through the constant renewal of the means of production, and therefore ending up in crises. They see that theory as having run up against a historical wall. So you can say Bernstein does this in the 1899 in Preconditions of Socialism. He'll just say, look, this whole dialectical model thing, it's just not working out for us. What we really need is a theory of why capitalism stays put. And then this is echoed again by Friedrich Pollock after the Russian Revolution, saying essentially we've moved on to a post-capitalist phase, one that's done with crises anyway. And so we really need to replace this political economic part of Marxism, preserve its method, and throw out its conclusions. People often cite a Lukács essay called, what is it called? What is orthodoxy or something? It's the beginning of that 1923 History and Class Consciousness book, to be able to make this distinction between method and theoretical conclusion. Now, what happens with CRT is one of the many, many ways that people come to replace the critique of value with some other critique. So instead of talking about value, we'll talk about race. And in fact, sometimes it's really comical, at least it's comical to me, if you look at it through these lenses, where some of these especially in that larger body of critical race theory, they'll quote Marx word for word, but replace all the economic terms with race. So there you can see the conceptual move, and that can rope people in who are not particularly interested in supporting any class, or who might. I mean, it can rope well-meaning Marxists in. If you already want to throw overboard the theory of value.
Pascal, do you want to add something to that?
No, I mean, I'd like to, let's get into the subject matter in terms of where this theory comes from. Exactly. Can you trace the actual history of critical race theory in terms of where it gets its origins from and where it stems from in terms of its foundations?
Yeah, so it's a species of something else. Initially it's a species of something called critical legal studies. The word critical there is really important. You see critical all the time these days. You'll see, so we have to ask the question, what did critical legal studies, what is critical race theory, what is critical theory, of which both of them are examples? What's critical about it, and what on earth is the opposite of critical? Uncritical? Okay, well, that's a good question. The answer is that the opposite of critical is traditional. And so in the first formulation of this distinction, which comes about really right after World War II in the context of the Frankfurt School, when Max Horkheimer takes over from his Marxist predecessors and reorients the Frankfurt School away from political economy, giants like Heinrich Grossman, who's really getting his day in the sun these days, and toward more cultural analyses. When Horkheimer takes over, he gives an inaugural address. And in that inaugural address, he makes a distinction between traditional theory and critical theory. Now, the distinction he's trying to make, and there has details, but the thing I want to highlight about it is that traditional is a slur. That is, traditional is meant to say merely traditional, the authority of tradition, of patriarchy, of received opinion, that which we inherit unthinkingly. That's what he means by traditional. That's traditional theory. Critical theory is this next form of self-conscious theory that has been sufficiently, set to, knows its own preconditions. Traditional theory is what? He takes it to be paradigmatically, Kantian epistemology, in which there's logic and there's a set of concepts that have some role to play in the objectivity of the world, and we can have theories about the world, and those theories reflect the world, and they're very powerful because they allow us to manipulate the world. So you can think of the success of physics, right? On the other hand, he wants to counterpose critical theory. Now, critical theory is going to be, going to always know that concepts are dialectical, that they're in motion, that there's a historical process to their development and their coming to be, and they're self-undermining, and that's what we ought to be tracking. Now, when it comes to legal studies, what do they mean by critical? Well, critical there means adopting the method of Marxism, the dialectical method that had been introduced, that had been separated from its political economic conclusions by Horkheimer and et cetera, and now applied to a new realm. So in the critical legal studies framework, it would be, well, look, the legal system is just a superstructure for a war of powers on the ground. That's the legal realist presupposition that the critical legal studies, let's say, cadre, came up with. And so in critical legal studies, that's what they meant by critical. That they were looking underneath the surface of society and seeing the play of objective forces underneath. So critical race theory is just a particular version of that. So as you peel away the surface, underneath you see the dynamic of race, which is self-perpetuating, which is always there for racial, to reproduce, that classic Marxian term, to reproduce racial oppression, rather than exploitation, right? In fact, they say exploitation is there in order to forward racial oppression rather than the other way around. Anyway, that's where it originates. It's in the 1970s that CLS gets going, that is critical legal studies gets going. Critical race theory emerges after that. It's really a product of the 1980s. Think the Reagan era.
Would you say it's neoliberal in nature or no?
It's I got to tell you, I don't love the word neoliberal. If only because I don't know exactly what it means, and if what it means is the ideology that backs up governments retreating from investment in public works and endorsing market solutions. So let's say Pinochet's neoliberalism, that's what it's cued around. That period is over anyway. We're all about public investments in things now, and whether it was ever true in a society like ours, which is so tied to military investments, is another question. I also think that people reach for the word neoliberalism when they really mean the word capitalism, and I'd rather be anti-capitalist than anti-neoliberal. But that it's coterminous with neoliberalism and part of the same cultural moment, I think, is totally without doubt.
Do you have a problem with the notion that there's a specific period of time, particularly in the 70s, when the nature of capitalism in America exacerbates to become more cannibalistic?
Absolutely. Well, what happens? What happens is that you get an endemic profitability crisis. So if you look at anyone's numbers, you look at Michael Roberts' numbers, you look at Andrew Kleinman's numbers. I mean, you may or may not like any of these political economists, contemporary Marxian political economists, but everyone agrees that from roughly the beginning of U.S. industrialism after the war, to the 1970s, to basically 1973, there's a profitability boom. That profitability boom comes to a decisive close, and there need to be policy solutions in order to stave off what will become an economic crisis. And so they try to privatize the economy. They try to crush the power of labor. And one of the most effective ways of crushing the power of labor, of course, is splitting it off from itself, right? Trying to get workers not to solidarize with other workers in terms of their economic position. And a new ideology of race is, of course, part of that. We see it today when strikebreakers, a labor organizer friend of mine once said that one easy way to break a strike is by instituting some anti-racist policy on the shop floor. You'll get the obvious reaction, and it'll break the solidarity of the workers. So clearly that has a role to play.
Can you give an example of what that might look like?
Oh, they might open an office for diversity and inclusion. In fact, I think they do that on my campus in order to stave off unionizing in higher education. I mean, they'll do that. And it's really simple, right? And then you get people to form some kind of opinion on it. And once the opinion is being formed vis-a-vis the policy of the bosses, you're now there's a debate among the workers on the terrain of the boss's ideological attack. So you've lost already. I mean, and you could do this with religion. You could do this with nationality. You could do this in anything. I mean, look, speaking of co-optation of minorities, I'm a gay man in America. There is no white gay man in America. There's no group in the United States that's a minority, that's, an oppressed minority of some kind, that is more co-opted to everything from American imperialism to consumer culture to,
it is so funny. I was having literally, because of your piece, I sent it to my lady friend, and she works in law, and she had some confusion around intersectionality because she works in criminal law. And the last thing that, you know, your lawyer is going to tell you when you're trying to, you know, plea bargain your drug case is, well, Your Honor, what it was the intersection of his gayness and the fact that he was selling ass for meth. Like those two things intersected, and that's when your undercover got him.
We coming for you, nigga.
That's
You'd be surprised how many people love the crack.
that's what happened in that intersection.
Listen, don't do math. From my world to yours, don't do math. It's terrible for you.
But we were having this conversation, and exactly what you said came up. I'll tell you off air. It's definitely an off air conversation. I'm not trying to get canceled. It's the last thing I need.
No, you're not. No.
I found the solution to getting canceled, actually, because I have strong opinions and they're minority opinions, and have been my entire life. It turns out that if you completely eliminate social media from your life, you just don't notice when you get canceled, and it kind of goes away like the wind.
Stephan, man, you were sharper with the ideas, bro. I'm telling you right now.
I think that might be. I've had I'll have an off-air conversation with you when we're done with this show. I'll tell you about some things. I kind of, yes, we will have a, you know, in the champagne room, maybe we'll go down the gay rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, we should. Yeah, we'll talk about flags too. Anyway, what were we talking about?
We were talking about, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is exactly the notion of the permanence of race and the permanence of racial conflict and its incapacity to change or be remedied. I've made the argument that I actually think that Afro-pessimism gets this kind of permanent racial conflict theory from critical race theory. I think the actual antecedents of the Frank Willison's school of thought come out of Derek Bell's kind of pessimistic worldview. Ain't nothing changed, ain't nothing ever going to change. I'd like to know where your thoughts are in terms of where this comes from and how much this plays a role in CRT and Afro-pessimism.
That's a really, really good question. And it also allows me to link up the theory of value with the critical conception of race. The theory of value is interesting in Marxism because it's not only an essence underneath the surface of society that explains the functioning on the surface of society. I'm one of those people who believes that it does. It also has an engine to it that leads to the self-overcoming of those relations of production and their replacement by some other, more democratic and equitable, it turns out, thank goodness, set of new social relations. Nothing like that when you replace the concept of value with the concept of race. Because, you know, if there exists a system that only is there to perpetuate racial oppression, then, well, it just does that all day. And because there's no profitability crisis, there is no like oppression, no crisis or something on the other side. It just exists forever. So it's taking, you know, this wonderful aspect of Marxian theory and sort of transmogrifying into something that is more or less anti-political. So that's the kind of intellectual genealogy part of that. The other side of this that I find difficult to swallow is, you know, this is not a new thought. I mean, I was just abroad for 3 weeks. I was in Europe for 3 weeks. And I have a French friend who says, you know, I lived in the United States for a long time, and he lives in France now. It took me 6 to 8 months living in France before I was able to recognize an Algerian from 2 blocks away. That is, we know that these things are peculiar. There is an American experience. My favorite writer on race in America is, like most people, and it's definitely gay chauvinism, but is James Baldwin, who
I knew you were going to say Baldwin. I was like, is he going to say Baldwin? Is he going to say
Baldwin? Best gay to ever live.
So do we have to have a gay off to have a contest to who's the best gay to ever live? You can have a gay off.
My travel buddy and I were actually doing top 5 gays of all time. I'll share my list in the champagne room. It was right after top 5 animals, and yeah, anyway. We need to talk about something in the bar. Anyway, so you know, his point is, look, it's an American phenomenon. There's an American, specifically American character to this. I don't think anyone's going to deny that. So what is the racial permanence stuff really about? It's really about some kind of patriotic optimism about the permanence of the United States. You know, it seems to me like U.S. imperialist propaganda, frankly.
So it's a kind of American exceptionalism in which the nation. Well, by the way, this notion that it's somehow an exceptional American thing is. Have you ever been to? Do these people go to? Do they travel? Have you ever been to Brazil? I mean, it's ridiculous. You know, this notion that the racial division is somehow just endemically American. It's absurd.
Well, you know, Wilderson's stuff is all anecdotal, right? You know, like I went to the Soviet Union and either what was it they called him an N-word, or someone said something like they can't date his daughter. It was some anecdotal story about you know, a comrade, you know, wasn't gonna let him hit, and it was like, oh, see, negrodom.
Oh, the best anecdote is the one where he tries to tell his audience implicitly, never explicitly, but implicitly, that by virtue of their I don't know, by virtue of their racial commitments or implicit racial commitments, it's improper to solidarize with Palestine. That one's a good one.
Yeah, he said that too. I've heard that one.
Yeah, it gets pretty.
Do you get mad at the whole thing where like any violence against any other group is anti-black violence? Like if somebody like knocked you in the head with a fucking bottle, it'd be like, damn, anti-black violence struck again.
Right. Yeah. Good. Yeah. That you know, you gotta love when there's a really, really, really general concept that you know allows people a little bit of emotional investment that gets people's cockles up, that can be applied to just enough things. A concept like that is extremely dangerous because it just poisons our everyday life. We start to see it everywhere. We start to tweet about it. It starts to really get at us, and we start to think that things are real when in fact they're merely general.
So can you get some sort of like super friends like combination of Wilderson's Afro-pessimism mixed with intersectionality, or does his just always trump out because it's like that's anti-black? The gay guy at the intersection of meth and prostitution, it's anti-black.
To pick a very well-trodden intersection, to pick a very busy, the light is just flashing red. It's just Pascal's not liking my jokes about it.
He's this is the thing, Stephan. If he laughs, then he's complicit in the canceling. If he doesn't laugh, then it's Jason's fault. Remember that.
Okay.
This is chess. It's not checkers.
Well, I'll work on him then. I'll work on him. But yeah, no, I mean, look, Wilderson requires the binary in order for his thing to work. You know, and so he belies the idea that all oppressive frameworks are binary by nature. That one's more or less intuitive, probably correct, and that real people get subsumed within this ideological space. This ideological space is nonetheless objective for the Tinkerbell reason that if we all believe it, it comes true, and therefore his very person is subsumed, in fact, identical with an idea, and because that idea is intolerable, there's that actually quite terrifying scene in the mirror, which is, I mean, certainly more terrifying than anything I've seen in a horror film recently. We all went to go see Nope, which is really terrible. But it's like he sees himself in the mirror, and then he sees the void, right? Because he identifies with the idea that he thinks that
he's a non-being.
Yeah, he sees the non-being. Can you imagine looking in the mirror and seeing the non-being? I mean, put that on.
Tells the black wife, if I'm nothing and you're nothing, how can we be nothing together?
Right.
That's a great breakup letter. Like, hey, sorry, it's not going to work out, Karen, but I saw nothing. You're nothing. But Becky, that's something. I am going to catch so much heat tomorrow. But
I was about to say, never a Karen, always a Becky. I've always ever wanted to be Becky. But
I'm going to get a Frank Wilson email. I don't even fucking know you, man. Pascal wants to laugh so bad.
No, this charlatans and hustlers, man. The fact that people take this bullshit seriously while people are actually suffering the consequences of capitalism and racism in this country is this really what pisses me off, man. And all of these people are such transparent con men and women. When they go to conferences on Martha's Vineyard to talk about the intersectionality of Afro-pessimistic farts and whatnot. Let me give you a break, man.
That's true. They are they're unaware of the role. They're largely unaware of the role that they play, even though they play it super effectively. Maybe it's just because I'm in this position, but you know that this is also labor that is highly unorganized. It's a low supply, low demand labor market, and there's this tenure structure that I come up for next year. So fingers crossed that
this
it all works
was the
out
wrong show to get on, man. This was not the. This was the wrong damn route. You
kidding? I've been telling my friends about this. I've been telling them. Did you know that I'm going to be on TIR podcast? No. I mean, So actually, by the way, Historical Materialism just gave me a contract, so it looks like I'll have a book in that series. So that's going to work out well. But no, the tenure process actually is one of those processes that exists to discipline you, right? So you need your peers to sign off that you are sufficiently disciplined in the discipline, and then you get your livelihood, or else you're off in the sea, and you can go into real estate or something else, which of course includes all this personal humiliation stuff. So there are real economic, social forces that lead people to the charlatanry, which doesn't mean that we don't send them to the gulag. It just means that we understand why there are so many of them.
And the foundation world too, don't forget, in terms of funding this research and giving them grants for this stupidity, is another mechanism that keeps it going. And not only that, it's also a self-fulfilling brand of authenticity. Since black academics are relegated to talking about race disproportionately, they've got to come up with these kinds of ways of reifying the particularities of black exceptionalism in ways that justify their theorizations to give them credibility and credentiality.
Yep. Yeah, that's how it works. Look, it works in the left media sphere this way too. I hate to put this way on part of the left media sphere, but there's charlatanry everywhere where there's the possibility for social advancement, and I take it that that's just a problem we have to wrestle with and can't quite avoid entirely.
That's the new video essay that I'm putting together is on the idea that we're living in a current era of kayfabe, which is a kind of an old carnival term for you never break the myth that it's all fake. And we just got the trailer back today. I was trying to share it with Pascal before you came on. I'll send it to you via email so you can check it out. We haven't dropped the trailer yet, but it's the longest thing I've ever done. I took a very deep dive into media and this idea. I've done a lot of work. If you guys have watched any of the video essays I've done, kind of talking about, I don't like to say grifter, but people fighting for market share and influencer culture, just on popular culture. I think we kind of underestimate influencer culture's role now in the way we digest news. But I'll go ahead and forward that to you. And thank you very much for joining us, Stephan. This was a very fun talk. I wasn't so Gene Bajlan makes the thumbnails, and sometimes he has fun and doesn't actually put pictures of people. So I remember him pitching the show, and sometimes if you pitch the show to me, I go, yeah, that's fine. And sometimes I'll be like, well, are they black? And I think when Gene pitched it, he actually pitched it. This ain't a black guy. Like he said that, but it was one of those, yeah, that's fine. It was one of those. And so I looked at the thumbnail real quick and I didn't put two and two together. I was like, wait a minute. Isn't that like Derek Bell in the thing? I don't think that's Stephan Hammel.
You want some new views? Get the resurrected Derek Bell, and then you'll get more views. than me. No, yeah, it's like the internet's favorite thing, I'm sure, is just a white gay talking about race in America. But
You are going to be
sure
so anti-black in the halls of Irvine, which in itself is just anti-black because it's Irvine.
it's probably true. Yeah, yeah. I saw in the chat that there's a discussion of that in a moment, so I can't wait.
Of
I can't wait.
Irvine or your gayness?
Something about race, something about academia and race that I just saw
We might
flash
be doing
by.
it in
I
the
have
campaign
this.
room.
Okay, we're gonna go to the
Champagne.
you know, Stephan knows the show. Stephan knows the champagne room. He is ready. Do you actually have liquor by you? Because that makes the show that much funnier. If you go.
Oh, did you think this?
Oh, okay. I think it was Jackie Lukman went and just got a bottle one night. Wasn't it Jackie? Did she get a bottle one
I
night?
think that might have been a.
Oh, shout out to Jackie Lukman. She's not doing all that well with health, so let's send some positive vibes Jackie's way. She's a good comrade, fun person to have on the show. So shout out to Jackie.
Indeed.
Stephan, is there anything else you want to pitch? There should be links to everything.
No, that's it. I'll leave this and do the other and click on the
everything that you can find Stephan on, and the link to this article should be in the description of the show wherever you are listening to for the audio only and watching. Thank you guys so much. Don't forget, if you haven't done it, please hit the like, please hit the subscribe. It helps with the algorithm. And what really, I'm not trying to be funny. Every time we do a show, I get a message that says these shows are not suitable for advertising. So the fact that we said the word gay 4 times, now it's 5. We're probably not suitable for advertising. Like, I'm going to have to bring Stephan to Google and be like, look, come on. So thank you guys so much. M. Toussaint, thank you for moderating. Jean Bajlan, thank you for being there, because I'm still terrified that the show is going off my phone because the Wi-Fi in the entire state of Baja has been cut. So on that note, we are
Out.
love it.